All right, welcome everybody. This is our second installment of our authentication track. We've got Andrew Shikiar, the Executive Director of FIDO, so take it away.
Thank you, John. So my first question is, how in the world am I supposed to follow John Bradley on this stage? It's a tough act to follow. But I am here today to talk to you about the state of FIDO. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the Identiverse crowd about where FIDO stands. What we're going to do in our short time together, I'm going to kind of frame things by talking about where FIDO came from, for those of you who might not be initiated in FIDO's background. I'm going to talk about where we stand today, and then talk a little bit about where we're going moving forward. How many of you were in the keynote this morning or at the end of it and saw our news? Okay, great. So that is our news. I'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. As we look at FIDO, and where did we start? Right? Why did FIDO come to pass? So FIDO is an industry movement to solve the password problem. It was publicly launched in 2013 by 6 or 7 companies aimed at addressing this password problem that was plaguing the industry. We've grown to have over 250 members worldwide who collaborate on this very problem. So what you see up there is our board of directors. Right? It's an impressive list of logos. The way I like looking at our board of directors is, if you closed your eyes and I asked you the question, who do we need to have sitting around a table to help solve the industry's password problem? You'd probably open them and it'd look a lot like this. All right, so we have platform and consumer electronics manufacturers who create devices that we all use every day. We have experts in security and biometrics. And last but not least, we have relying parties and service providers whose businesses depend upon the ability to securely deliver high assurance services to billions of users worldwide. And that's where our use cases come from. That's where the requirements come from. And all these companies come together to collaborate to create FIDO specifications and related outputs. So again, that's our board of directors. We have sponsor members, associate members, and you see liaison partners as well. So it's very important for us to engage with other .orgs and associations to develop joint use cases and drive market education. So for example, W3C, EMVCO, GSMA, this gives us broader reach and broader engagement in the marketplace. So here's some not breaking news. Passwords suck, right? So oftentimes I give this talk and I start with a question, who likes passwords? And there's always one person who raises their hand, but generally we don't like passwords, right? So as a consumer, we can all relate to this. They're hard to use, they're hard to remember, you end up defaulting to bad password usage. We could spend all day talking about these statistics, right? So as a consumer, we don't like them, As an IT administrator, you loathe them. You understand the risks inherent to managing passwords in your enterprise or for your customers. If you're a compliance person or a CFO, you understand the costs associated with managing help desks and the cost of password resets. If you're a marketing person, you understand the brand threat associated with a data breach. And this is my favorite news statistics from Okta, so thank you anyone from Okta. Passwords make us sad, all right? So let's not be sad. Let's find a way to get beyond passwords, and that's what FIDO is trying to do. We're trying to make everybody happy in a passwordless future. So when FIDO was founded, FIDO was founded with an intentionally narrow scope, just looking at user authentication. So this pyramid is a simplified version of the identity pyramid. We looked at passwords and user authentication as an approachable segment of this that needed to be fixed. Right? So our focus is only on user authentication and trying to move from password-based authentication to stronger, simpler authentication. Right? So stronger authentication is not a new thing. We'll talk about other 2FA methods in a second. But the simpler piece is also very important. Right? So adding the right amount of friction, but not too much, to allow users to actually adopt this. Because one thing I think we've all learned, or the industry learned over time, is that adoption of 2FA is very tricky, right? If it's too hard, people won't use it. If it's too easy, it's probably not secure enough. So FIDO, aimed to get the right blend of, strong authentication and a user-friendly package. And this is another way of looking at this, right? So passwords, as we know, have, very weak security and pretty poor usability. So the default go-to, in years past was OTPs, and I think that's changed over the past year or so. But as people have come to realize that OTPs, they're even less usable, right? So what's worse than one password? 2 passwords. But also there's usability challenges, but also security is not inherently more secure than passwords, right? Because at the end of the day, an OTP is still a shared secret, right? It might be shared for a shorter time period, but it's still centrally stored. still vulnerable to hacks, to breaches, to man-in-the-middle attacks, so OTPs are not the answer. The problem is shared secrets. In fact, we say we're trying to move to a passwordless future. We're really trying to move to a future without shared secrets. And that's what FIDO's aiming to do. We're trying to move from an outdated approach to user authentication based on centrally stored shared secrets to one that leverages public key cryptography and lets users authenticate locally to the devices that they use every day, right? Through single gesture possession-based authentication. So simpler, stronger authentication. That's been FIDO's focus, and that's what we've been executing upon over the years. And that was realized, shortly after our launch, through a couple sets of specifications. So our first sets of specifications were the UAF, Universal Authentication Framework, which is a biometric approach to user authentication or re-authentication, so a password replacement, basically, for native apps primarily. And the second set of specifications was U2F, FIDO Universal Second Factor Authentication, which supplements the password with an external security key, or more recently, a platform authenticator embedded in the device. So FIDO does three things. We create specifications, we run enablement programs, and the middle of this is certification. Right, I like to think that specifications without certification is like one hand clapping. Right? You need certification to validate that the specification, that products conform to the specs. And FIDO goes another step by actually doing true interoperability testing. So if you see a FIDO certified product, a FIDO certified server, you know it can interoperate with a FIDO certified authenticator and vice versa. So we launched a FIDO certified program around 3 years ago. It's grown rapidly. We have over 600 FIDO certified products on market across our specifications. We certify servers, we certify clients, SDKs, and authenticators. Most of the certified products come from vendors, but I'd note that a lot of relying parties use our open standards to create their own FIDO servers for their own deployments and take the time to get those certified as well. They certify those for, both for company peace of mind, but also to make sure they could take part in the broader ecosystem and that they'll be able to interoperate with other products coming into their environment. So certification helps vendors, helps relying parties as you deploy take advantage and realize the benefit of open standards by future-proofing your FIDO authentication investment. So we've seen a lot of adoption and growth with the initial set of specifications. Two case studies here. One is with Google, one's with NTT Docomo. Google deployed FIDO security keys. There's been some coverage of this. We say FIDO's unphishable, right? It makes us uncomfortable to say that, but here's a good case study. Google rolled out security keys to 85,000 employees. There was not one account takeover. Right, so that's when we say FIDO's unphishable, that's a good data point backing that up. On the biometric side, NTT Docomo worked with Knock Knock Labs to deploy FIDO UAF to close to 80 million mobile subscribers in Japan. Right, so this is a biometric use case where across their full range of smartphones, users can just use biometrics to log into Docomo services, but also take part in offers and services and commerce from their ecosystem in the Docomo ecosystem. And those are just a sample. Here's some more logos. These are early deployments, early adopters, sampling again. What you see here are companies across industries, across borders. You see insurance, finance, social services, social media, you name it. All these companies are early adopters of FIDO authentication, and they continue to support FIDO moving forward. If you want to hear more, I'd encourage you to attend a panel on Friday. So both John and I will be on a panel, or John's facilitating the panel, but we'll have representatives from Intuit, T-Mobile, and Netflix talk about their experience, their hands-on experience, deploying FIDO authentication to their customers and inside their enterprise. So please join us on Friday at 10:30. So backing up, here we were in 2015. We're seeing, the specs are out. We're seeing initial adoption. But FIDO realized that the next step for mass adoption needed to be to make FIDO a standard feature across browsers, platforms, and devices. And at the time, FIDO's technical working groups were working on something called the FIDO 2.0 Web API. To gain further adoption of this, FIDO decided to submit this work into W3C. So the FIDO 2.0 web work went into W3C. The web authentication working group was formed, and that eventually brought us WebAuthn. Right, so sometimes you'll hear about FIDO 2.0. That was a predecessor to FIDO 2. That is what became WebAuthn inside of W3C. And so that work started in early 2016, and then just this past January, or February, it got finalized as final recommendation from W3C, meaning that WebAuthn and FIDO2 are official web standards. So that was great collaboration between FIDO and our partners at W3C. A lot of the individuals who sit in the Web Authentication Working Group in W3C also sit inside of FIDO Alliance in our own technical working groups. So there's close collaboration on that front. And that brought us FIDO2, right? So FIDO2 is comprised of WebAuthn and CTAP, which is a protocol from FIDO Alliance, Client to Authenticator Protocol, which basically extends the old FIDO U2F use case to include device-to-device authentication. These two things equal FIDO2. So what FIDO does around FIDO2, we certify products for being FIDO2 certified, both servers and clients, and then we'll run a number of enablement programs against this as well, which I'll talk about momentarily. So that is where we stand today, right? So FIDO2 was released last summer, and we're driving adoption of FIDO2 actively in the marketplace. So the first half of 2019 has been a very busy period for FIDO, driving cross-platform support for FIDO authentication. So I mentioned it this morning, but it's worth repeating. A couple key milestones this year. First one was when Google submitted Android to be a FIDO certified platform, FIDO2 certified platform. That means any Android 7 or later handset is now FIDO certified. You can use that as a FIDO authenticator. You can use the biometric on that to log into a mobile website rather than using a password. That's very compelling. A couple of months later, Microsoft submitted Windows 10 for certification as well. That is now also a FIDO2 certified authenticator. I've seen a lot of demos today, using Windows Hello. This is, using FIDO authentication. So through that, we've expanded the reach of FIDO, by over 1 billion new users who can now have access to FIDO authentication. Additionally, let's talk about browsers. Right. So when the Web Authentication Working Group featured inputs from all the major browser manufacturers. And when FIDO2 was first launched in middle of 2018, it came with support out of the gate from Edge, Firefox, and Chrome. And what we've done since then is broaden that level of support. Right, so we're very focused on having broader and deeper support across the browsers. Most recently, Safari has announced initial support for WebAuthn and FIDO2 security keys in the latest version of Safari on macOS. So we certainly hope that Apple continues on this path towards full support of FIDO authentication in their browsers and on their platforms. So this talks about the endpoints, right, and where things sit today. And we'll talk about how we're going to help address that in a couple of minutes. Some other key things we've done the past several months is new certification programs. So I talked about functional certification before. We also have a security certification program. This is very important. We have 3 basic levels of FIDO certified authenticators, which basically ask the question, how well does the authenticator protect the private key? Right, so L1 is an authenticator that's passed some vendor questionnaire, some assessments about how that authenticator was built. Any L2 authenticators means that it's protected, the private key is protected against malware attacks. L3 means it's protected against brute force or hardware attacks. What this allows a relying party to do, or an enterprise to do, is to specify the level of support needed for the authenticator to be accepted, or to factor that into their business logic, their rules engine, and perhaps force a step-up authentication if someone doesn't have the level of authenticator that they need. So security certified authenticators combined with metadata service gives RPs the ability to do this granular level of user authentication. Another certification program that was launched is an expansion of our functional certification program around FIDO2. The vast majority of products going through FIDO certification these days are being FIDO2 certified, as our vendors are seeing more and more demand from their customers to have FIDO2 certified products. And the last new program that we launched was biometric certification. And this is a unique program. Again, going back to FIDO's composition, we have a pretty broad set of stakeholders. And one thing they recognize is that there is a gap in the marketplace. There is no kind of market-driven biometric testing program out there. And so we created this biometric certification program, which validates the performance and the efficacy of biometric components and how well they perform against industry standards and also against presentation attack detection. So we launched this program. It's actually independent of the FIDO core specifications. So a biometric certified device may not necessarily be a FIDO certified device. This is, again, of benefit to the industry, and we're seeing a lot of interest in this program. The first devices to go through biometric certification were Samsung's flagship Galaxy devices, the S10 and the S10 Plus, announced back in February, and we have several more products going through this program right now. Additionally, we push our specifications into formal standards bodies. Right? So FIDO creates specifications, and then we submit them to standards bodies for formal standardization, similar to what we did with FIDO 2.0 and WebAuthn. We've done with ITU, where FIDO CTAP and FIDO UAF are now both ITU standards. We're also engaged in ISO, working on some of their related work in biometric authentication. So this is another way of FIDO trying to engage the industry, drive broader adoption, drive broader coalescence around this approach to user authentication. And FIDO 2 is also seeing progress in market. Another question, did anyone attend our webinar last week on the login.gov deployment? Anybody? A couple of you. So I thought it was fascinating. So the GSA has deployed FIDO 2, used FIDO 2 for login.gov. This is a portal that any of us can use to access a variety of government services as citizens or as government employees. I'd encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about, from Tales from the Trenches, and in addition to attending our session on Friday, check out the archive of this webinar, because it is very interesting about the lessons they've learned and the benefits they've seen by using FIDO 2 to deploy login.gov. And then also you see a variety of service providers, crypto providers, social media companies. This is the beginning of deployments. There are many more, both external deployments and a lot of enterprises using this internally as Microsoft has built FIDO 2 support into their core products and services. So that's where we stand today. And so let's talk a little bit about the future of authentication. What are we going to do next? All right, what's this alliance of 250 companies going to do next? So we talked about browser support and device support. The key message there is that users now have access to FIDO authentication. This has always been kind of a chicken and egg type scenario, right? So previously, when we talked to relying parties about FIDO, the question was, well, how many people can use it? How many people can access it? So we're slowly answering that part of the equation. But the other piece is actually getting sites and services to leverage this capability. And WebAuthn brings a whole new element to the table, right? WebAuthn is a publicly addressable API that any developer, any web developer can use, quite easily actually, to add FIDO authentication into their website, into their web service. So one focus for FIDO will be to actually activate and engage developer communities through our partners, through our community, to educate people on the benefits of using FIDO authentication on our sites, but also how-tos. So we'll create and present information materials. We will point people to certified developer libraries that are proven to work FIDO 2. We'll run workshops and we'll run hackathons. So on the latter 2 points, a couple anecdotes. Last month, we ran our first FIDO developer workshop in Prague. It was tied to one of our quarterly member meetings. And his overflow capacity, kind of like this, smaller room, we had 50 people, 60 crowded in there. And afterwards, I talked to this younger developer, and he's like, loved the workshop. And it turns out he'd taken a bus 13 hours from Slovakia to get there, which I thought was really cool. Then I talked to 2 guys who came from Seattle to go to the workshop. So obviously, I think there's a lot of appetite to learn how to use FIDO authentication, and we'll take advantage of that and move that forward in 2019 and beyond. Hackathons, I want to mention this. In Korea, we have an active working group, a FIDO Korea working group that has run a hackathon open to any participant in Korea. We had, I think, over 150 submissions of entrepreneurial groups and academics who actually wanted to take part in this hackathon and are now being tutored by leading companies in Korea like Samsung and LG and others who are helping nurture these groups along with their FIDO implementations. So you'll see more of this from FIDO moving forward. But still, even if we get people building FIDO sites and services, even if we broaden the reach of platforms and browsers, there are still gaps in adjacent areas that need to be filled for FIDO's mission to be realized. And we talked about this morning, and the 2 spaces are identity verification and IoT. All right, so what are we going to do here? So we have the new work areas. So we're going to strengthen identity verification assurance to support better account recovery, and then we're going to work to take the password out of IoT. So a couple more details on this. Identity verification binding working group. So this is a new working group from FIDO Alliance, just launched. We're seeking new participants to take part in this. This group will provide authoritative guidance and solution certifications for possession-based identity verification procedures. So possession-based is really key. Again, everything FIDO does is local authentication. It follows through here where it's possession of a government-issued identity and matching the selfie to that, for example, and then taking that match and binding that identity to the user's credential on the IAM stack. So IDWG will be defining criteria for solution performance. So one thing we'll be doing is actually running a certification program to assess how well different document authentication vendors actually fulfill this objective. And then the working group will also produce best practice papers and drive market awareness. So this work is just getting started. We're seeking broader inputs. Right now it's being co-chaired, or it is being co-chaired by FIDO and MasterCard. A lot of the relying parties in our membership are taking part in this. A lot of the vendors in our membership are taking part in this. If this is of interest to your company, please do join us and take part to make sure that this reflects the needs of the industry at large. The other new work area is around IoT. So we have the IoT technical working group. I say we need to take the password out of IoT. That's essentially what we're trying to do here, right? So this working group is co-chaired by ARM and by Qualcomm. And it is looking at a variety of use cases, both consumer use cases and industrial use cases, at ways to authenticate users to IoT devices to IoT hubs, IoT devices to each other, all secure device-to-device, user-to-device authentication without necessitating a password. So there's been some prior work done. There's been some prior collaboration done by some of the key stakeholders in this working group. It's anticipated that they will want to contribute some of this work into the IoT working group in order to jumpstart the technical work, the specification work that FIDO will do around IoT. So again, if you're interested in this space and you have a passion around this space, please consider joining FIDO to take part in this working group and evolve these efforts. One other note, so tomorrow afternoon, we will have a small information session for people interested in learning more about these two working groups. So if you're interested in learning more as a potential participant, come see me afterwards. There's limited space, but if you're interested, we'll find a way to get you in. So in summary, we see FIDO Alliance, and this says the future of user authentication. I think it's really the present and the future of authentication. Our mission has always been and remains to be the industry's answer to the password problem. It has strong industry support. I think that's one of the really unique hallmarks and attributes of FIDO is the diverse set of stakeholders inside of FIDO Alliance who collaborate quite well on all of our outputs. FIDO reflects thousands of specification development hours. So all of our specs are open. They're free to use. But they weren't created overnight, right? So some of the brightest minds on the planet in security and authentication have poured tens of thousands of development hours into these specifications. We continue to innovate, right? So not only on our core specifications, both UAF and FIDO2, but also in these new working areas. FIDO will take use cases from the industry, continue to innovate for the benefit of the industry at large, and then enablement. So enablement takes two forms, right? One is kind of external enablement, the developer content I was talking about, education, but also we have an internal enablement process. So we have deployment working groups where companies who are seeking to deploy FIDO in a variety of scenarios, so either enterprise, government, or consumer, meet together almost like a user group to compare notes, establish best practices, identify technical requirements if need be, but collectively work with each other to help everyone move their FIDO deployments forward. So enablement is an ongoing focus for FIDO as well. So with that, that's the end of the slides. I encourage you to get involved in the FIDO ecosystem. I think we have a couple minutes. What's that? Conference? We will be having a FIDO conference, yes. So next year, so John reminded me, so this is not yet announced, so I guess we're announcing it now. So one thing we do with FIDO, so we meet as a membership 3 times a year, right? Once in Asia, once in North America, once in Europe. And before that, each time we have a public workshop. And so what we're going to do is expand that model for our North American conference next year to have a public conference called Authenticate 2020. So stay tuned for that. It'll be next spring. There'll be a 2-day kind of public conference where we'll talk about, get deep on authentication issues with a public expo, followed by the 2-day member meeting after that. So keep your ears peeled or eyes peeled for Authenticate 2020. Okay. I think, how much time do we have?
You're out of time.
Out of time. If you have questions, please find me in the hallway. Thank you very much.